Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. So I've heard a growing number of people kind of on with national platforms recently say that empathy is a weakness. Empathy and compassion, one said, is even toxic. And that was coming from someone with a Christian background. Many of the people that I've heard who talk like this also seem to draw very clear distinctions between men and women. According to them, men should not be very compassionate or empathetic. Their job is to be demanding and strict, but it's okay for women to be empathetic and nurturing. So for the record, in case you don't know me yet, I don't really agree with that outlook. And Jesus doesn't see it that way either. Today's parable of the prodigal son, or lost son as some call it, shows us a picture of a father who represents God and is compassionate and empathetic. And if you don't recognize just how jarring this picture of the father really is, then you're kind of missing the point that Jesus is trying to make. And I want to reflect on some of the details today and invite you to think about its lessons and ultimately how you will choose to live. I want to start by acknowledging that the concern about too much compassion or empathy is certainly nothing new. And I would guess that just about every one of us here has struggled at times with just how much empathy to extend to another person or a group or a cause of some kind. Unless you're dealing with someone who is incapable of any empathy at all, the struggle, when you really get down to it, isn't so much whether empathy is a bad thing. The problem is who we have empathy for. We tend to have empathy for people like us and who we agree with, and we tend to have less empathy for people who aggravate us or, that we see as threatening to us in some way. In other words, often empathy is an emotional reflex, but not something perhaps that we challenge ourselves to develop as much. Establishing expectations and standards isn't wrong as a person of faith. Even holding people accountable to standards isn't wrong. As Christians, loving the neighbor is really one of these core expectations of what it means to live in faith. That means seeing one another as human beings who deserve basic dignity, even when we're upset and have legitimate grievances. Jesus actually held religious leaders accountable in many stories in the Gospels. And in the vast majority of cases, it had to do with their failure to show compassion and to act justly toward others. And these are the times in the Gospels when we see Jesus upset and angry. He demonstrated incredible empathy and patience with people who had been cut out and mistreated somehow. But he didn't have much patience for people who used power and position to exploit or reject others. We're in a series called Into the Wilderness. The wilderness is more than just a place, it's an experience. And we started with Jesus being tested in the wilderness, but we can find ourselves driven into our own kind of proverbial wilderness where we feel disoriented and threatened. But it also provides us an opportunity to strengthen our identity and purpose, to discover beauty and hope even in these barren places, and to find a way through it to new life. Today we see a younger, wayward son that's been in a desolate place. Frustrated with his situation, he asks for his inheritance early and abandons his father and family to go his own way. And things don't go so well. He makes bad decisions with his money. He squanders his inheritance, and then a severe famine comes. And he finds himself earning pennies in a job that would have been forbidden in his tradition. Pigs were seen as ritually unclean in the Jewish faith. He initially leaves his family behind in an act of defiance and frustration, with hopes and dreams of venturing into the unknown. But now his adventure has become a kind of harsh exile. He knows he's made mistakes. Pride would probably keep him in this lonely place. But instead, Jesus says he comes to his senses. People try to read into his true intentions at this point. Has he really had a change of heart? Or is he just playing for a better situation now that he's destitute? We can't really know with certainty. But coming to your senses means having a change of mind. And that's what the definition of repentance is. It's seeing things differently to the extent that you change. We shouldn't undervalue the importance of being able to have a change of mind. Sometimes we overvalue determination, which can become obstinance. It's wise to recognize when we've made a bad judgment, and we all do at some point. Admitting that allows us to change course and chart a path out of the situation that we've gotten ourselves into. It allows us to find our way back from the wilderness. And that's what the younger son does. And he rehearses what he'll say to his father, going over it in his mind, how to make amends. But before he ever has a chance to say a thing, his father sees him from a distance and runs to him. He's been waiting for him and watching for him. He never stopped loving him, even though his departure was a sign of disrespect. He welcomes him fully. None of this talk of being a servant and not his son anymore. He throws a huge party. The father says, "This son of mine was dead and is alive again. He's lost and is found." So there's a celebration, a happy ending, right? Except for the older son. And we already know, in many ways, the older son. Many of us can identify with him, as a matter of fact, on some level. He's critical of his father's empathy and compassion. He sees his father as a fool and weak for being so generous. He's being taken advantage of. The older son has been responsible. He's done everything asked of him. He's done hard work, as his brother has been off wasting his inheritance. There are, to be clear, real complex decisions to be made in relationships to friends or loved ones who are caught in destructive patterns. How far do you walk with them through their wilderness to help them find their way? How many times do you extend grace? But this isn't simply a moral issue of being right or wrong. Fundamentally, it's an issue of life. The older brother's anger isn't just with his kid brother, it's anger with his father. He feels it's unfair. He never had a party like this. He refuses to go into the party. Now the older brother is defiant and frustrated, and he's distancing himself from his father and brother, and now he finds himself in a kind of wilderness. His feelings of judgment have left him alone. And so this parable is ultimately about two sons who cast themselves into their own forms of isolation and exile. The younger son eventually finds his way back home. And what is the way back? It's a path of humility and a change of mind earned through hard lessons. But now the older brother is alone, outside looking in. His judgment of his brother and his father is keeping him from celebrating and embracing life. The father explains, "Son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found." So how does the older brother make his way back from his own exile? He has to follow the path of his father. The way back is lined with grace, compassion, and generosity, by embracing life for himself and his brother, not simply by making judgments. The father goes out to him to plead with him to come in, but the father can't make him. In the end, the story is unresolved. Will the older brother forgive? Will he enter into the party? Will he leave his self-imposed exile and re-enter community and relationship? This is also our choice. How we choose to live will either draw us more deeply into a gracious and generous community, or it will send us into a harsh exile defined by judgment and spite. Why did Jesus tell this parable to begin with? Because as today's gospel begins, all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus, and the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." Very often we develop a system of rights and wrongs, of rules and rewards, value judgments about who is worthy and who is not, who belongs in our community and who does not. It seems to make sense of things. If unchecked, it almost always leads to a harsh and unforgiving experience of life for everyone in the end. Are we so sure that God has adopted our system? What Jesus says is that the Father makes his own choices and he chooses to be generous and gracious. What the Father prioritizes in this story is relationship over rules and compassion over judgment. And so we're left with deciding how we want to respond to that. We get to choose whether we will embrace the new life the Father has extended to those he chooses to embrace, and whether we want to take part in that celebration. Preserving life and joy does not come by limiting it for ourselves, but by sharing it with others, even those we might find it harder to empathize with. Know that God's love and grace is extended to you, even if you're not ready to accept it, and even if others think you don't deserve it. No matter which sibling you think you are, there is always a way back. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.